High dynamic range. If it's done correctly, you will never notice it, except for the amazing tonal range. Hi everyone, let's look at HDR and how it should be done. The thought process at its simplest. 1. Don't do it in camera with HDR. 2. Shoot raw. 3. Make sure you bracket your exposures covering for the highlights and the shadows. And 4. Only change the shutter speed. Also, just keep adjustments as simple as possible in Adobe Camera Raw, Lightroom or Affinity Photo. Let's make some great tones. In Adobe Bridge, select the images for the HDR conversion. You select one and then hold down Shift and click the end, and that will select all of them. Right click and select Open in Adobe Camera Raw. You will see that all three images only have a variation of shutter speed here. This one 1 second, this one 3 seconds, and this one 1/3 of a second. If you've got the exposures correct on the highlights and shadows side of the bracketing, you should not do any adjustments here to the raw files at this stage. However, if you have shot on auto white balance, make sure the colour balance matches across all three images here. So just checking those, and they are all the same. So this is the midtones image. This one has been exposed for the shadow detail, and this one for these highlights. Go up to the menu icon here and select all. Then in any one of the thumbnails, right click and choose Merge to HDR. The conversion process gets underway and may take a number of seconds, and eventually the HDR preview window will open. Now if you've shot the images on a tripod, you will not have to align images. If you have shot handheld or have had any movement in the images, do use align images and use deghost and experiment with the strength. Low always works best really. You can also use show overlay to see if any movement has occurred if required. I've had some excellent results with this in the past where I've not used a tripod. It's also worth keeping checked auto apply settings, as a lot of the time it does a good job with this. Click on Merge and a new DNG file, that's a digital negative, will be produced with auto settings. This will be a good starting point if you're not used to HDR. So we're going to save that, and what happens is it opens up this new DNG file here. One thing to notice is the exposure range here, and this now extends up to 10 each side. And if you've not noticed it, it's normally 5. However, this is not really useful as an exposure slider, but it becomes extremely useful when you start using the adjustment brush for dodging and burning. Now we can fine tune these sliders from the auto inputs to your own liking if you wish, but do keep it looking natural. More importantly, do some selective dodging and burning if required. Now I'm going to reset all of this to 0 and show you how I would tackle it on manual. So overall it looks like a fairly average exposure from this point. First thing I'm going to do is bring down the highlights. I'm looking at the pizza sign and the downlighters on the roof for this. I'm happy with that. Now leave the shadows alone and bring up the exposure to where you want the overall exposure to be. Just recheck the highlights again. And then check the contrast if you need any further contrast. I'm going to pop this up a little bit. Now for this image, I am going to add a little bit of mid-tone clarity. And also at this point, you might want to just double check the colour balance here. I know there was a very obvious red glow when I shot this picture, so I'm really happy how that's come out as is. I'm not going to move that colour balance at all. Now this is where the dynamic range really helps, using the adjustment brush and dodging and burning. Now burn in any areas where needed using the adjustment brush with low flow and high feather. I'm just using the bracket keys to change the brush on the keyboard here. I'm going to add a new brush and just take this down a little bit further in the doorway here. And then with a new brush, switch over to dodging any areas where needed as well. So this is with the positive exposure. And for this image, I think I'm going to work just really with the detail of the bike here. So zooming in. And don't forget, this is just a guess at this point on the exposure, so we'll do a couple of strokes. Just see what that does. I'll just work through some of those shadow areas. I'm going to go with a new brush and just do some highlighting as well. Just push that up a little bit. I'm just going to tone that back, I think, as well, where I've been working on that. So just fine tune that where you want it. In fact, I will even just zoom out to see how that looks further out. Yeah, that's come alive a lot more in there, so that works really well. You can also just preview by turning this icon off and on. So you can see the effects of the dodging and burning there. And just really finish as normal with composition, checking on your verticals, crop and the balance of the image. So let's have a quick look at that. I'm going to sort these verticals out with the transform tool. So that's the verticals sorted. Now a lot of the time when I check composition and cropping, I do turn the image upside down and zoom out, and it just helps me assess the balance. Over to the crop tool, put the crop on. I know I want to get rid of these highlights here because they're little distractions at the edge there. And I certainly want to get rid of this. This is the actual owner down here. And we'll lose this window as well. So I know these are the edges that I want to keep in, and it's now just getting the overall balance of the whole image. And it is looking very heavy in the sky there, isn't it? It really draws you there. So let's get rid of that sky. And that's helping to really bring emphasis to the bike and the pizza sign and really what's going on here. Just fine tune that. I think we're going to bring it in on this angle here. I think that works very naturally there. Rotate it back round. Click on either the zoom or hand tool to remove the crop. Zoom out a little bit so I can assess it the right way up. I think there's a lot more balance within that image with that crop. So there's the final image with a beautiful tonal range from the highlights through those mid-tones but onto the shadows as well. That's HDR and what can be done.